The stagecoach rattled to a dusty halt in front of Watsonville's general store, and Franklin Anderson watched from his buckboard as a woman emerged clutching a bundle of dried wildflowers so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She wore a gray traveling dress that had seen better days, and her auburn hair escaped in wisps from beneath a plain bonnet. But it was the desperate way she held those flowers that made his chest tighten with an emotion he could not name. It was late spring in 1874, and California's central coast was painted in shades of gold and green. Franklin had made the 2-hour journey from his ranch into town specifically to meet the stage, though he had told himself it was only to pick up supplies. He was not a man who lied to himself often, but the letter folded in his vest pocket burned like a brand against his ribs. Miss Olivia Harper was arriving today, a mail-order bride arranged through an agency back east, and he had spent 3 months wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his 32 years. The woman descended the stagecoach steps carefully, her free hand gripping the rail. When her boots touched the ground, she stood perfectly still for a moment, as if gathering courage from the earth itself. Franklin climbed down from his buckboard and removed his hat, suddenly aware of the dust on his clothes and the fact that he had not trimmed his dark beard in over a week. "Miss Harper." His voice came out rougher than intended. She turned toward him, and he found himself looking into eyes the color of storm clouds over the Pacific. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but she held her chin up with a pride that spoke of better circumstances fallen away. She was younger than he had expected, perhaps 23 or 24, with a delicate beauty that seemed out of place in this rough country. "Mr. Anderson." She did not make it a question. Her voice was low and steady, with the refined accent of someone educated back east. "I apologize for my appearance. The journey was long. No apology needed." He twisted his hat in his hands, feeling suddenly foolish. "Welcome to Watsonville, to California." She nodded once, her grip on the flowers never loosening. The driver was hauling down a single trunk from the top of the coach, worn leather with brass fittings that had once been fine. Franklin moved to help, lifting it easily despite its weight. Whatever life Olivia Harper had left behind, she had brought little of it with her. "I will need to retrieve the rest of my things," she said, then seemed to catch herself. This is all I have." The admission cost her something. He could see it in the way her shoulders stiffened, in the faint color that rose to her cheeks. Franklin settled the trunk in the back of his buckboard and turned to help her up to the seat, but she had already managed it herself, still holding those damned flowers. He climbed up beside her and took the reins, clicking his tongue to set the horses moving. The town of Watsonville was small but growing, with wooden buildings lining the main street and the promise of the railroad that would arrive within the year. People stopped their conversations to stare as they passed, and Franklin felt Olivia tense beside him. "Folks are curious," he said by way of explanation. "We do not get many newcomers." "I understand." She kept her eyes forward, her back straight as a poker. "I imagine my arrival is quite the spectacle." There was bitterness in her tone, and he glanced at her profile. Up close, he could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the way her lips pressed together as if holding back words that wanted to escape. The flowers in her lap were a mixture of wildflowers, all dried and faded but carefully preserved. Lupine and poppy, Indian paintbrush and wild rose. "Those flowers," he began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. "They are from home." Her voice was soft now, almost too quiet to hear over the rattle of the wheels. "From Pennsylvania. I picked them last summer in the meadow behind my family's house." She paused, and when she spoke again, there was a tremor she could not quite control. "Before everything changed." Franklin did not press. He had learned in his years alone on the ranch that some stories came out in their own time and some stayed buried forever. Instead, he guided the horses through town and out onto the road that led west toward the coast. His ranch sat in the valley between the town and the sea, protected from the worst of the coastal winds but close enough to smell the salt air on certain days. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather and wood, the steady clip of hooves on packed earth. The landscape opened up around them, rolling hills covered in spring grass and dotted with oak trees. Cattle grazed in the distance, their red hides bright against the green. "It is beautiful here," Olivia said finally, and he heard genuine wonder in her voice. "It is." He felt a swell of pride for this land he had claimed and worked for the past 8 years. Different from Pennsylvania, I imagine. Very different. She lifted her face to the sun, and some of the tension seemed to leave her shoulders. "We had hills and forests, but nothing quite so open as this. It feels as though you can see forever. Some days you almost can." He pointed toward the west, where a line of darker hills rose against the sky. "The ocean is just beyond those. On clear mornings, you can hear the waves from the house." She turned to look at him fully for the first time, and he felt the weight of her gaze. "You live alone on your ranch." "I do. I have 2 men who help with the cattle, Miguel and his son Carlos. They have a place about a mile south. But the main house is just me." He cleared his throat. "Was just me." The implication hung in the air between them. They had corresponded for 3 months through the agency, formal letters that revealed little beyond the basic facts of their situations. He was a rancher in California, 32 years old, unmarried and looking for a wife. She was a woman from Pennsylvania, 24 years old, needing a new start. The reasons behind those simple statements had remained mostly unexplored. "I should tell you," Olivia said, her voice taking on a formal quality that suggested she had rehearsed these words, "that I am not who I once was. My father owned a textile mill in Philadelphia. We were comfortable, even prosperous. Then he made some poor investments, and when the panic of '73 hit, we lost everything." She took a breath. "He died last winter. Heart failure, the doctor said, but I think it was shame that killed him. My mother passed when I was young, so there was no one else. The house was sold to pay debts. I had nowhere to go." Franklin absorbed this information, understanding dawning. The refined accent, the quality of that worn trunk, the way she held herself with unconscious dignity. She had fallen from grace, and it had been a long fall. "I am sorry for your loss," he said, and meant it. She nodded, blinking rapidly. "I want you to know that I will honor our agreement. I may not have experience as a ranch wife, but I learn quickly. I can cook and clean and manage a household. I will not be a burden to you." The desperate sincerity in her voice made his heart ache. "Miss Harper, Olivia, if I may, I did not arrange for you to come here because I needed a housekeeper. I can manage well enough on my own in that regard. I asked for a wife because this land, this life, it is good, but it is lonely. I wanted someone to share it with." Her storm-gray eyes searched his face as if looking for deception. "You do not know me, Mr. Anderson, Franklin, and you are right, I do not, but we have time to remedy that." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I do not expect anything from you that you are not ready to give. The house has 2 bedrooms. You may have your privacy until you feel comfortable with other arrangements." The relief that washed over her face was so profound it hurt to see. "Thank you," she whispered. They crested a hill, and the valley spread out before them. His ranch house sat nestled against a grove of oak trees, a simple structure of wood and stone that he had built with his own hands. The barn stood behind it, newly painted red, and corrals stretched out to either side. It was modest compared to what she must have known, but it was solid and well-maintained. "There," he said, pointing. "Home." Olivia leaned forward, and he saw her lips curve in the first real smile he had witnessed. "It looks like it belongs here," she said. "Like it grew up out of the earth itself." It was exactly how he felt about the place, and hearing her express, it sent warmth through his chest. He guided the horses down the slope and pulled up in front of the house. Before he could set the brake, Olivia had already climbed down, still clutching her flowers. She walked slowly toward the house, taking in details. The wide porch that wrapped around two sides, the windows with their shutters, the stone chimney rising from the center. He followed with her trunk, setting it down on the porch. "Would you like to see inside?" She nodded, and he opened the door, standing back to let her enter first. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and a simple pine table near the windows. He had tried to clean before leaving that morning, washing the dishes and sweeping the floor. Now he saw it through her eyes and felt ashamed at its plainness. But Olivia moved through the space with interest, her fingers trailing over the back of a chair, the edge of the table. "You made this furniture yourself?" "Most of it. The stove I had shipped from San Francisco 2 years ago." She examined the cast iron stove with something like reverence. "It is beautiful. Much better than the old one we had." He showed her the 2 bedrooms, both simply furnished with beds and dressers he had built. His room looked lived in, with clothes hanging on pegs and books stacked on the bedside table. The other room was neat and waiting, the bed covered with a quilt he had bought from a woman in town. "This would be yours," he said, standing in the doorway, "if it suits." Olivia walked to the window and looked out at the view of the valley. When she turned back to him, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "It is perfect, more than I expected, more than I deserve." "Stop that." The words came out sharper than he intended. "You deserve good things, Olivia. Life dealt you some hard blows, but that does not diminish your worth." She blinked and a single tear escaped down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. "You are kind to say so." "I do not say things to be kind. I say them because they are true." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable with the intensity of the moment. "I will bring in your trunk." "Take your time settling in. I need to ride out and check on the herd, but I will be back before dark. There is food in the cold box if you get hungry." She nodded, composing herself. "Thank you, Franklin." Hearing his name in her refined voice did strange things to his equilibrium. He retreated before he could say something foolish, hauling her trunk into the bedroom and then escaping to the barn. His horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Duke, nickered a greeting. Franklin saddled him with practiced efficiency, his hands working automatically while his mind churned. What had he been thinking, bringing a cultured woman from Philadelphia to this isolated ranch? She was accustomed to society and culture, to fine things and educated conversation. What could he offer her besides hard work and loneliness? He was a man who had left his family's farm in Missouri at 21, worked as a cowhand for 3 years, and then claimed this land and built everything with his own sweat and blood. He could read and write and figure sums, but his education had ended at 14 when his father needed him in the fields. Duke's steady gait took them up into the hills where the cattle grazed. He found Miguel and Carlos mending a section of fence near the creek. Miguel was 45, a compact man with weathered brown skin and a quick smile. His son Carlos was 19, lean and serious, learning the ranching trade with dedication. "Patron," Miguel called out in greeting. "The bride, she has arrived, she has." Franklin dismounted and helped them stretch wire. "Her name is Olivia." "Is she pretty?" Carlos asked, then flushed when his father cuffed him lightly on the shoulder. "Mind your manners," Miguel scolded, but his eyes twinkled with amusement. "You must forgive my son, Senator Franklin. He is at the age where he notices such things." Franklin felt his own face heat. "She is. Pretty, I mean, but she is also far from home and everything she knew. I would appreciate it if you both made her feel welcome when you meet her." "Of course," Miguel said seriously. "Maria will want to visit to bring a gift. It is our way." Maria was Miguel's wife, a warm woman who ruled her household with love and firm discipline. Franklin knew Olivia could use a friend, someone to help her navigate this new life. That would be good. Maybe in a day or two, once she has had time to settle. They finished the fence work and checked the cattle, all of which appeared healthy and content in the spring grass. By the time Franklin rode back to the house, the sun was sinking toward the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He found Olivia in the kitchen, and the sight stopped him in his tracks. She had changed into a simple calico dress, the gray traveling suit nowhere in evidence. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and she had tied an apron around her waist. The table was set with his mismatched plates and cups, and something savory was cooking on the stove. "I hope you do not mind," she said, turning from the stove. "I found beans and salt pork in your stores, and there was cornmeal for bread. It is not much, but I thought you would be hungry." "I do not mind at all." He hung his hat on a peg and went to wash his hands in the basin by the door. "You did not need to go to the trouble." "It is no trouble. I needed something to occupy my hands." She ladled beans into a bowl and set it on the table, then brought over a plate of cornbread. "Please, sit." They sat across from each other, and Franklin bowed his head to say grace, keeping it simple. When he looked up, Olivia was watching him with an unreadable expression. "Your faith is important to you," she observed. "It is. My mother raised me in the church. I do not make it to services often, given the distance to town, but I hold to the teachings." He hesitated. "Is that a problem?" "No. I was raised Presbyterian myself. It is good to know you are a man of faith." She took a small bite of cornbread, chewing thoughtfully. "The minister who married my parents was a kind man. He helped me arrange the journey here, wrote to the agency on my behalf. Then I owe him a debt of gratitude." She met his eyes across the table, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of the strangeness and potential of their situation. They ate in companionable silence, and Franklin was pleasantly surprised to find the food well prepared despite the simple ingredients. After dinner, she refused his offer to help with the dishes, shooing him toward the chair by the fireplace. He sat and tried to read, but found himself watching her instead as she moved efficiently around the kitchen. The dried flowers sat on the dresser in her room, visible through the open door, and he wondered what memories they held for her. When the dishes were done and put away, Olivia dried her hands and turned to face him. "I should retire. The journey was exhausting." "Of course." He stood. "If you need anything in the night, I am just across the hall." A faint blush colored her cheeks. "Thank you for everything, for being understanding. Get some rest, Olivia." She disappeared into her room, closing the door softly. Franklin sat back down and stared at the cold fireplace, listening to the small sounds of her moving around, preparing for bed. When silence finally settled over the house, he remained in his chair, reluctant to seek his own rest. He thought about those dried flowers, carried across a continent and clutched like a lifeline. She had brought so little with her, but those flowers had made the journey. They meant something, represented something she could not bear to leave behind. An idea began to form in his mind, tentative at first, then growing stronger. He knew every inch of this ranch, knew where the wildflowers bloomed in spring and summer. California had its own beauty, its own flowers. Perhaps he could show her that this new home had gifts to offer, that loss did not have to mean the end of beauty. The next morning, Franklin rose before dawn as was his habit. He dressed quietly and slipped out of the house, not wanting to wake Olivia. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, stars fading against the growing glow. He saddled Duke and rode up into the hills, following paths he knew by heart. Spring in this part of California was a miracle of color and growth. Winter rains had been good this year, and the hillsides exploded with wildflowers. He dismounted near a meadow where lupine grew thick, their purple spikes swaying in the morning breeze. Among them bloomed California poppies, their orange petals like drops of flame against the green. Franklin had never been a man who paid much attention to flowers beyond appreciating their beauty in passing. But now he looked at them with new eyes, imagining Olivia's reaction. He searched until he found what he wanted, a spot where multiple types of flowers grew together in a natural garden. Lupine and poppies, wild rose bushes climbing up the rocks, Indian paintbrush adding splashes of red. He rode back to the house as the sun cleared the horizon, his mind working through the details of his plan. It would take time and effort, but he had both. He would need to prepare the ground, source the plants, learn how to help them thrive in a garden setting rather than wild on the hillsides. Olivia was already up when he entered the house, dressed in the same calico dress from the night before. She had coffee brewing and the smell filled the kitchen with welcome warmth. "Good morning," she said, looking up from the stove. "I hope I did not use too much coffee. I was not sure of your preference." "Smells perfect." He poured himself a cup and sat at the table. "You are an early riser." "Years of habit. My father kept the hours of his mill workers, rising at 5 to be at the factory by 6. She brought over a plate of fried eggs and bacon. "I found eggs in the cold box. The chickens are behind the barn. I should have mentioned that yesterday." He took a bite and nodded appreciation. "This is excellent." They ate breakfast together, and Franklin found himself relaxing into the rhythm of shared meals and small domestic moments. When they had finished, he pushed back from the table. "I need to ride out again, check on things." "Would you like to come with me, see more of the ranch?" Surprise flickered across her face, followed by pleasure. "I would like that very much. Should I change?" "That dress is fine for riding if you are comfortable. Do you ride?" "I did once, though it has been some years." "Duke is steady, and I have a mare that is gentle as a lamb. We will take it easy." 20 minutes later, they were both mounted and heading out across the valley. Olivia sat her horse well despite her claims of being out of practice, her back straight and her hands light on the reins. Franklin kept his buckskin to a walk, letting her find her balance. He showed her the boundaries of his land, explaining how he had built the ranch from nothing. They rode through meadows of spring grass where cattle grazed contentedly. He pointed out the creek that provided water year-round, fed by springs higher in the hills. "How much land do you have?" Olivia asked, shading her eyes to look across the valley. 640 acres, a full section. I bought it from the land office when I first came to California. Paid for it with money I saved working as a cowhand." He felt a swell of pride. "Every fence post, every building, I put them here with my own hands. You should be proud. It is a remarkable accomplishment." They rode in silence for a while, climbing higher into the hills. When they reached the meadow he had visited that morning, Franklin reined in. "I wanted to show you this." Olivia gasped as she took in the riot of color spread before them. Wildflowers covered the hillside in every direction, creating a tapestry of purple and orange and red. The morning sun lit them from behind, making the petals glow. "Franklin, it is beautiful." She dismounted before he could help her, walking into the flowers with wonder on her face. She knelt beside a patch of lupine, touching the petals gently. "We had nothing like this at home. Pennsylvania has wildflowers, but not in such profusion." He dismounted and came to stand beside her. "California is like that. The Spanish who first came here called it the land of gold, but it is not just the metal. It is this too. Golden hillsides, golden light." She stood and turned to face him, and he was struck again by the storm gray of her eyes. "Thank you for bringing me here. I have felt so displaced, so out of place, but this helps, seeing beauty again." "I am glad." He cleared his throat, suddenly nervous. "I had an idea, actually. About those dried flowers you brought with you." Her hand went unconsciously to her chest, as if she could feel them through the distance. "What about them?" "I thought maybe I could plant you a garden, near the house, where you could see it from the kitchen window. Fill it with California flowers so you could have that beauty close by." He rushed on before he lost his nerve. "I know it is not the same as what you left behind, but maybe it could help, make this place feel more like home." Olivia stared at him, her lips parted in surprise. For a long moment she said nothing, and Franklin felt his face heat with embarrassment. It had been a foolish idea, too sentimental for a practical rancher. Then her eyes filled with tears, and she pressed her hands to her mouth. "You would do that, for me, of course." The words came out gruff. "You are my wife, Olivia. Or you will be, once we can get to town for the preacher. I want you to be happy here." She moved before he could react, closing the distance between them and embracing him. It was brief and somewhat awkward, but the warmth of her body against his sent electricity through his veins. She pulled back quickly, wiping at her eyes. "I am sorry. That was forward of me, but I cannot remember the last time someone did something kind simply for my happiness." She took a shaky breath. "Yes, yes, I would love a garden." Relief and something warmer flooded through him. "Then you shall have one. I will start preparing the ground this week." They stood together in the meadow of wildflowers, the morning sun warming their shoulders, and Franklin felt the first stirring of something that might grow into love. It was too soon to call it that, too fragile to examine too closely. But it was there, a seed planted, waiting for the right conditions to bloom. Over the following days, Franklin threw himself into the project with the same determination he had brought to building his ranch. He chose a spot east of the house where the morning sun would warm the ground, but the afternoon heat would be tempered by the shadow of the oaks. With a shovel and pick, he broke the earth, turning the dry California soil and amending it with composted manure from the barn. Olivia watched from the porch that first day, then brought him water when the sun climbed high. The second day, she came down to kneel beside him, pulling weeds from the cleared ground. By the third day, they were working side by side, and Franklin found himself talking more than he had in years. He told her about growing up in Missouri, the middle son of 5 children on a struggling farm. About the wanderlust that had driven him west at 21, following stories of opportunity in California. About the years spent working cattle for other men, learning the land and the trade, saving every penny until he could claim a piece of earth for himself. In turn, Olivia spoke of her childhood in Philadelphia, of a mother who died when she was 10 and a father who threw himself into business to escape his grief. Of the loneliness of growing up in a house full of servants but empty of affection. Of learning to find joy in small things, books from her father's library, walks in the park, the flowers that grew behind their summer house in the country. "I pressed flowers as a girl," she said, sitting back on her heels and pushing hair from her face. "Made books of them, labeled with their names and where I found them. My governess said it was frivolous, but my mother had done the same, so my father allowed it." "The flowers you brought, were they from those books?" "No, those were lost when we sold the house." These I gathered the last summer before everything fell apart. I knew, somehow, that it might be the last time I stood in that meadow. So I picked one of each type and dried them, pressed them in an old hymnal. They became a promise to myself that I would survive, that I would find beauty again somewhere. Franklin reached over and covered her dirt-smudged hand with his own. You will. Here. She turned her palm up, lacing her fingers with his. I am beginning to believe that. They stayed like that for a long moment, hands joined, before the practical need to get back to work pulled them apart. But something had shifted between them. A wall breached. That evening, after supper, Franklin brought out a catalog he had ordered from a San Francisco nursery. They sat together at the table, heads bent over the pages, discussing which plants might thrive in the garden. Olivia's knowledge of flowers surprised him, and her excitement was infectious. Roses, certainly, she said, pointing to an illustration. And lavender, if it will grow here. We had lavender at the summer house. My mother dried it for sachets. Lavender should do well. The climate here is similar to the Mediterranean, or so I have been told. He turned pages. What about these, California poppies? They are native, grow wild in the hills. Yes, I loved the ones we saw in the meadow, and lupine if it can be cultivated. She paused, her finger tracing the edge of a page. Maybe some herbs too, for cooking, rosemary and thyme. Whatever you want, this is your garden. She looked up at him, eyes shining. Our garden. You are creating it. The word "our" settled into his chest, warm and right. Our garden, then. They ordered plants by mail to be delivered within the month. In the meantime, Franklin rode back to the wild meadow and carefully dug up specimens of lupine and poppies, bringing them back in buckets of soil. Olivia helped him transplant them into the prepared beds, her hands gentle as she settled roots into the earth. Will they survive the move? She asked, patting soil around a poppy plant. Some will, some might not, but they are hardy, they want to grow. He sat back and surveyed their work. Just like us. She smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her face. He had seen glimpses of it over the past week, but this was different. This reached her eyes, chasing away the shadows of loss that so often lingered there. That Sunday, Franklin hitched up the buckboard for the trip into Watsonville. The town had a small Presbyterian church that held services every week, and he felt it was time to bring Olivia into the community. She dressed carefully in her gray traveling suit, the nicest thing she owned, and pinned her hair up with special care. The church was a simple white building on the edge of town, and a dozen families were gathering when they arrived. Franklin helped Olivia down from the buckboard, aware of the curious stares they attracted. He guided her inside with a hand on the small of her back, protective. Reverend Thomas was a young man, perhaps 30, who had come to California from Massachusetts the year before. He greeted them warmly after the service, shaking Franklin's hand and bowing over Olivia's. Miss Harper, I presume? We heard you had arrived. Welcome to Watsonville. Thank you, Reverend. Olivia's voice was steady, her breeding showing in her posture and manners. It is good to be here. Franklin has been a member of this congregation for several years, though we understand the difficulty of regular attendance given the distance to your ranch. Reverend Thomas smiled. I wonder if we might discuss arrangements for a wedding ceremony. I assume that is why you have come. Olivia blushed, but Franklin nodded. It is. We would like to marry as soon as convenient. They arranged for the following Saturday, a small ceremony to take place after the regular service. As they left the church, several women approached, curiosity evident on their faces. A plump woman in her 40s introduced herself as Martha Henderson, the wife of Watsonville's general store owner. You must come to tea this week, she insisted, taking Olivia's hand. All the ladies want to meet you properly. Thursday afternoon, if that suits. Olivia glanced at Franklin, who nodded encouragement. "That would be lovely, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you." On the drive home, Olivia was quiet, staring out at the passing landscape. Franklin let the silence hold until they were nearly back to the ranch, then spoke gently. "You handled that well. I know it is not easy being the subject of so much curiosity." "It is strange," she admitted. "In Philadelphia, I was nobody by the end, the daughter of a failed businessman, an object of pity at best. Here, I am interesting simply for being new. You are more than that. You are intelligent and capable and kind. People will see that." She turned to look at him, her expression searching. "You have a generous way of seeing people, Franklin Anderson. I hope I can live up to your vision of me." "You already do." The week passed in a blur of activity. Franklin worked on the garden every spare moment, building raised beds and installing a small arbor near the back where climbing roses could eventually grow. Olivia helped when she could, but she also had taken over all the household management, cooking and cleaning with an efficiency that impressed him. On Thursday, he drove her into town for the tea at Martha Henderson's house. He spent the time at the general store, ordering supplies and speaking with other ranchers about cattle prices and the coming railroad. When he returned to collect Olivia, she emerged from the Henderson house with color in her cheeks and animation in her face. "How was it?" he asked as they headed home. "Surprisingly pleasant. The women were kind once they satisfied their curiosity about my background. Martha Henderson is a force of nature, but her heart is warm. And there was a younger woman there, Sarah Mitchell, who is close to my age. She is married to a farmer north of town. We spoke of books, and I think we could be friends. I am glad." He covered her hand briefly where it rested on the seat between them. "You need friends, Olivia, community. So do you." When the men asked about you at tea, several of the wives made it clear they expected us to join in town gatherings once we are settled. She paused. "If that is acceptable to you." "Of course. I have kept to myself too much these past years. It will be good for both of us to be more involved." Saturday arrived clear and warm, perfect spring weather. Olivia wore the same gray suit, but she had added a white collar that made it look almost festive. Franklin put on his best shirt and vest, polished his boots, and trimmed his beard carefully. When Olivia emerged from her room, ready to go, he felt his breath catch. She had pinned her hair up with extra care, leaving a few auburn curls to frame her face. She carried a small bouquet of the wildflowers from their garden, lupine and poppies tied with a ribbon. Her eyes were bright with nerves and excitement. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough. She blushed. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." The ceremony was simple and brief, held in the church with Martha Henderson and her husband standing as witnesses. Reverend Thomas led them through the traditional vows, and when the time came to seal their union with a kiss, Franklin cupped Olivia's face gently and pressed his lips to hers. It was chaste and respectful, but he felt the promise of it down to his bones. After the service, Martha had arranged a small reception at the general store, with cake and punch for the congregation. People surrounded them with congratulations and good wishes. Miguel and Maria were there with Carlos, and Maria embraced Olivia warmly. "You must come to dinner," Maria insisted. "Next week, yes. I will make my special tamales." Olivia agreed with genuine enthusiasm, and Franklin felt warmth spread through his chest. This was what he had wanted for her: acceptance, friendship, a place in the community. They stayed in town until early afternoon, then headed back to the ranch. The ride was quiet, both of them processing the significance of what had just occurred. They were married now, legally and before God. The reality of it settled over Franklin like a weight and a blessing combined. When they arrived home, he helped Olivia down from the buckboard, but this time he did not immediately release her waist. She looked up at him, a question in her eyes. "I meant what I said before," he told her. "I will not rush you. We have all the time we need to grow into this marriage." She reached up and touched his cheek, her palm warm against his skin. "Thank you for your patience. I find myself wanting to try, though, to be a true wife to you." His heart kicked against his ribs. "Are you certain?" "I am." She smiled, nervous but determined. "You have shown me nothing but kindness and respect. You are building me a garden, Franklin. How could I not want to meet you halfway?" He kissed her then, properly this time, and felt her respond. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard. He took her hand and led her inside, and the door closed behind them on the beginning of their married life. The following weeks passed in a golden haze. The garden grew, plants thriving under their combined care. The roses Franklin had ordered arrived, and he planted them carefully, showing Olivia how to prune and water them. Lavender filled one corner, its gray-green leaves already releasing scent when touched. Herbs clustered near the kitchen door, convenient for cooking. But it was more than the garden that bloomed. Franklin found himself falling in love with his wife, a little more each day. She was intelligent and funny, with a dry wit that caught him by surprise. She could discuss philosophy and literature, subjects he knew little about, but she listened with equal interest when he spoke of cattle breeding and land management. In the evenings, they sat together on the porch and watched the sun set over the western hills. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they simply existed in comfortable silence. At night, they came together in the bed they now shared, learning each other's bodies with growing confidence and pleasure. One morning in early June, Franklin woke to find Olivia already up and standing in the garden. He pulled on his trousers and joined her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. She leaned back against him, her head fitting perfectly under his chin. "The roses are budding," she said softly. "Look on the climber near the arbor." He followed her pointing finger and saw the tight buds forming along the thorny canes. "They will bloom within the week." "I never thanked you properly," she said, turning in his arms to face him. "For this, for all of this. When I stepped off that stagecoach 2 months ago, I was so afraid. I had lost everything and was going to marry a stranger. I did not dare hope for happiness. And now," he tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, "now I have more than I ever imagined. A home, a husband I am falling in love with, a garden full of promise." She stretched up to kiss him. "I am happy, Franklin, truly happy." "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now. "From the moment I saw you clutching those dried flowers, I think I was half in love with you. You were so brave, starting over in a strange place. We were both brave. You opened your home and heart to a stranger. That takes courage too." They stood together in the garden they had built, surrounded by the flowers he had planted for her, and Franklin felt complete in a way he never had before. This was what he had been working toward all those years, building his ranch and his life. Not just success or security, but love. A partner to share it all with. The summer passed in a rhythm of work and growing intimacy. The cattle thrived, and Franklin hired 2 more hands to help with the expanding herd. Olivia befriended Sarah Mitchell and several other women from town, and their home became a gathering place for occasional dinners and celebrations. In August, Olivia began feeling ill in the mornings. At first she dismissed it as something she ate, but when it continued for more than a week, Franklin insisted she see the doctor in town. He paced the waiting room while she was examined, his mind conjuring every possible ailment. When she emerged, her face was radiant. "I am with child. The doctor says I am about 2 months along." Franklin let out a whoop of joy that startled the doctor's other patients. He swept Olivia into his arms and spun her around, careful even in his excitement. A baby. We are having a baby. Due in February, the doctor thinks. She was laughing and crying at the same time. Are you happy? Happy. I am beyond happy. I am blessed. He set her down gently, suddenly aware that she was now precious cargo. You must be careful. No more heavy work in the garden. She rolled her eyes. I am pregnant, not made of glass. But I promise to be sensible. They celebrated that night with a special dinner, and Franklin found himself unable to stop grinning. A child. His child, their child. Another generation to inherit this land and this life they were building together. Olivia bloomed with pregnancy. Despite the morning sickness, she seemed to glow with an inner light. Her body changed, growing round with their child, and Franklin found her more beautiful than ever. He would catch her standing in the garden, hands on her swelling belly, talking softly to the baby. Those moments filled him with a tenderness so profound it was almost painful. In October, the roses bloomed a second time, a fall flush of color and scent. Olivia cut an armful and brought them inside, filling the house with their perfume. She pressed some to dry, creating the same kind of flower book she had made as a child. For the baby, she explained, showing Franklin the carefully labeled specimens. So when she is old enough, I can tell her about the garden her father planted for her mother. Franklin raised an eyebrow, or he, but I have a feeling it is a girl. She patted her belly. A mother's intuition. As it turned out, she was wrong. On a cold February morning in 1875, with Maria serving as midwife and Franklin pacing a trench in the front room, Olivia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Franklin was summoned into the bedroom to find his wife exhausted but smiling, holding a red-faced infant wrapped in a blanket. "Meet your son," she said softly. He approached carefully, in awe of the tiny life they had created. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were the storm gray of his mother's. Franklin reached out a tentative finger and felt his heart expand as the baby gripped it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Franklin whispered. "You are amazing. I love you so much. I love you too." Olivia was tired, but her eyes shone with joy. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed names extensively over the winter, but none had felt quite right. Now, looking at his son, Franklin thought of his own father, gone these past 5 years, and the legacy of hard work and integrity he had left. "What about William?" "After my father, William Anderson." Olivia tried it out. "Billy when he is small. Yes, I like it. William it is." Over the next year, Franklin watched his wife transform into a mother with the same grace and determination she brought to everything else. She was patient and loving, but also practical, refusing to let motherhood consume her entirely. The garden continued to thrive under her care, with little William often strapped to her back in a sling Maria had made. The ranch prospered. The railroad arrived in Watsonville in late 1875, opening new markets for cattle. Franklin expanded his herd and bought an additional quarter section of land to the north. He hired more help, building a bunkhouse for the cowboys who worked the growing operation. Through it all, the garden remained a sanctuary. On Sunday afternoons, when the work was done, Franklin and Olivia would walk through it together, William toddling between them once he learned to walk. The roses climbed high on the arbor now, creating a shaded retreat. Lavender sprawled in fragrant gray mounds. Every spring brought a new explosion of wildflowers, self-seeding and spreading beyond the original beds. One evening in the spring of 1877, they sat in the garden while William, now 2½, chased butterflies through the flower beds. Olivia was pregnant again, showing with their second child. She leaned against Franklin's shoulder, content. "You remember the day we met?" she asked. When I stepped off that stagecoach clutching those dried flowers like they were the most precious thing in the world, I remember thinking you looked lost and brave and beautiful, all at once. He kissed the top of her head. I remember wondering if I had made a terrible mistake, bringing a cultured lady to my rough ranch. I was so frightened, not of you exactly, but of the unknown, of having no choice but to make this work because I had nowhere else to go. She turned to look up at him. I could never have imagined this, that you would plant me a garden, that I would fall so deeply in love, that we would build this life together. The garden was the smartest thing I ever did. It gave us something to work on together, a reason to spend time talking and learning about each other. He covered her hand where it rested on her belly. You made this ranch a home, Olivia. Before you came, it was just a place I worked and slept. Now it is alive with love and laughter and purpose. William ran over and climbed into his mother's lap, dirt smudged and sweaty from his play. Mama, look, I found a ladybug. He opened his chubby fist to show them the red and black insect crawling across his palm. Olivia examined it with appropriate solemnity. Very good, darling. Can you remember what I told you about ladybugs? They eat bad bugs. They help the garden. He watched as it took flight, then wriggled down to resume his explorations. Franklin pulled Olivia closer, breathing in the scent of her hair mingled with the perfume of roses and lavender. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For getting on that stagecoach, for taking a chance on a rancher you had never met, for making me happier than I ever thought possible. She turned her face up for a kiss. Thank you for seeing me that first day. Not just the desperate woman with nowhere else to go, but the person I could become. Thank you for being patient while I learned to trust again. And thank you for the garden, always for the garden. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose after the flowers that still bloomed every year in the garden, arrived that summer. She had her mother's auburn hair and her father's dark eyes, and from her first breath, she seemed determined to make her presence known. William was initially suspicious of the tiny intruder, but quickly became her fiercely protective older brother. The years flowed on like water, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. There were hard times. A drought in 1880 that reduced the herd and tested their reserves. A fever that swept through the valley in 1882 and took several neighbors. But there were far more good times. William's first ride alone on a horse, Rose's wedding in the garden to a neighboring rancher's son, the birth of 5 grandchildren who ran wild through the flower beds just as their parents had through it all. Franklin and Olivia tended the garden together. It grew and changed over the decades, plants dying back and being replaced, new sections added as inspiration struck. But the core remained. The roses on their arbor, the lavender that scented every summer breeze, the wildflowers that returned each spring like faithful friends. On a warm afternoon in the spring of 1905, Franklin sat in the garden and watched his wife deadhead roses. She was 61 now, her auburn hair gone mostly gray, her hands weathered from decades of work. But to him, she was still the beautiful woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 31 years ago, clutching dried flowers and hope in equal measure. "Come sit with me," he called. "The roses can wait." She finished the bush she was working on, then came to settle beside him on the bench he had built under the arbor. All around them, the garden bloomed in riotous color. Bees hummed from flower to flower. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear their grandson Joseph shouting as he played with his sister. "I was thinking," Olivia said, taking his hand, "about those dried flowers I brought from Pennsylvania. They are still in my dresser, you know, pressed in that old hymnal. Are they? After all these years, they remind me of who I was and how far I have come. That frightened young woman who thought her life was over at 24. She squeezed his hand. She had no idea what was waiting for her. Franklin brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "We have built a good life together, haven't we? The best life. Better than anything I could have dreamed." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever have regrets?" "Not a single one." "You? Only that I did not meet you sooner. Think of all the years we could have had." "We have the years we were meant to have. And many more to come, God willing." They sat together in the garden as the afternoon light turned golden, surrounded by the beauty they had cultivated and the love they had grown. William and his family lived on the ranch now, taking over the day-to-day operations while Franklin and Olivia eased into their well-earned retirement. Rose visited often with her children, and the house was rarely without the sound of young voices. That evening, after a family dinner that filled the table Franklin had built so long ago, Olivia and Franklin walked through the garden one more time. It was their ritual, this evening stroll through the flowers. In summer, it meant breathing in the scent of roses and lavender. In winter, it meant checking on dormant plants and planning for spring. But always, always, it meant time together. "Franklin," Olivia said as they stood before the rose arbor, now thick with decades of growth, "thank you for planting this garden for me. Thank you for giving me a reason to plant it." He pulled her close. "For giving me everything that matters." She tilted her face up, and he kissed her, the kiss of two people who had loved each other well for over 30 years and intended to continue for as long as they were given. Around them, the garden bloomed in the twilight, a testament to what patience and love could grow. The years continued to pass, kind to them in their later age. Franklin remained strong and active well into his 70s, still riding out to check on the cattle and consult with William on ranch matters. Olivia tended her garden with the same dedication she had brought to it from the beginning, training her granddaughters in the art of cultivating beauty. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1915 with a party that filled the house and spilled out into the garden. Friends and family came from all over California to honor them. Their children and grandchildren performed a song they had written about the couple's love story, reducing Olivia to happy tears. As the sun set on that celebration, Franklin found his wife standing alone in the garden, looking at the roses. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, something he had done thousands of times over the decades. "Tired?" he asked, pleasantly so. "It was a beautiful party." She covered his arms with her own. "Did you hear what young Margaret asked me earlier?" "What's that?" "She wanted to know if the garden looked the same as when you first planted it for me." Olivia smiled. "I told her it was much bigger now, more established, but the heart of it, the reason for it, that has never changed." "No, it has not." Franklin kissed her temple. "I would plant you 1,000 gardens if I could. One was quite enough. This one, our garden." They stood together as the stars came out overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their beginning, now shining down on their golden years. The garden around them breathed with life, a living monument to the love between a rancher who had offered a new start and a mail-order bride who had arrived clutching dried flowers and hope. Franklin Anderson lived to be 84, passing peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1926 with Olivia beside him. She followed him less than 6 months later, unable and unwilling to live without her partner of 51 years. They were buried side by side in the Watsonville cemetery, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates that bracketed their life together. But their true monument was the garden that continued to bloom at the old ranch, now in the care of their granddaughter Margaret and her husband. The roses climbed higher every year. The lavender spread its fragrant mat. And every spring, the wildflowers returned, California poppies and lupine painting the ground in orange and purple, just as they had that first spring when a lonely rancher decided to show his new bride that beauty could take root anywhere, even in the most unexpected soil. Margaret would tell her own children the story of how their great-grandfather had planted the garden for their great-grandmother, who had arrived from far away clutching dried flowers. She would show them the pressed specimens in the old hymnal, brittle now but still recognizable, and explain how sometimes love means planting beauty for someone who has forgotten it exists. The garden itself became something of a local legend. People would drive out to see it, especially in spring when everything bloomed at once. Margaret welcomed visitors, understanding that her grandparents' love story belonged not just to the family, but to everyone who believed in second chances and the transformative power of patient devotion. And on certain evenings, when the light fell just right and the breeze carried the scent of roses and lavender, some swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand through the garden. An older couple, the man tall and strong, the woman graceful beside him. They would pause by the arbor where the roses grew thick, and the man would gather the woman close, and they would stand together as they had so many times in life, surrounded by the beauty they had created and the love that had never dimmed.